Week 17 of the fantasy football season, and now with the semifinals of the championship for most fantasy owners, here's a few defense DST units I look to start this week. The first one, the Buffalo Bills. So the Buffalo Bills, the last few weeks, they've been playing good football, and this week here, a great matchup versus the New England Patriots. I give up the fifth most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few games here for Buffalo, Week 14 at Kansas City, 17 points allowed, a sack, an interception, a fumble recovery. Week 15 versus Dallas, 10 points allowed, 3 sacks and INT. In Week 16 at the Chargers, 22 points allowed, surprisingly, to a banged-up Charger team. Obviously, with Herbert out for the season and Keenan Allen was out in that one. 22 points allowed and 5 sacks. So this week versus New England, where we know they're one of the worst offenses in the league. A lot of young guys, Bailey Zapp, Tyler Thornton in there as well. Ezekiel Elliott the last few weeks has been manning the backfield. Pretty much the only veteran on that team in Hunter Henry, even though he's nicked up. But right now, Buffalo, they got to go in there, take care of business this week in Week 17. And going back to Week 7, it was a tough loss for them, no doubt about it, in New England, which could cost them, obviously, a playoff spot. But I think this week they're going to be riled up once again as Buffalo, and they're going to have to take out this New England team, especially, like I said, they beat them early in the season. So I think Buffalo could be a DST that finishes in the top 5 this week. The next DST, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jags, their defense is definitely fallen off over the last few weeks here, and this team's fallen off as well, where the season's unraveling now, where the Jaguars have lost 4 games in a row, but this week is a streaming option, a great matchup for their DST versus the Panthers. I give up the 6th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last few weeks, like I mentioned, Week 14 at Cleveland, 31 points allowed, a sack, an INT, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 15 versus Baltimore, 23 points allowed, 3 sacks and INT. And Week 16 at Tampa Bay, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks. So right now, like I said, they're giving up a bunch of points over the last few weeks as Jacksonville. I know Trevor Lawrence possibly could miss this game as well, but this Panther offense really hasn't shown anything this season besides that good game versus the Packers and a tough loss. So this week is a streaming option, Jacksonville. They're a good DST this week. The next DST I look to start is the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns have a juicy matchup versus most likely Trevor Siemian, with Zach Wilson returns in this one versus the New York Jets. I know the Jets, they actually won that game versus the Commanders, but I put up 30 points in that one. It's that in that one game versus Houston this season. This Jet offense, one of the worst units in the league, and they've given up the most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So this week, I think Cleveland goes out there, they get pressure on Siemian or Zach Wilson, whoever the quarterback's going to be in this ball game. And Myles Garrett, we know he's the anchor of this defense. So the last few weeks for this DST, Week 14 versus Jacksonville, 27 points allowed, 4 sacks, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 15 versus Chicago, 11 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 INTs, a fumble recovery. In Week 16 at Houston in that one, 22 points allowed, 3 sacks, and 2 interceptions. So this week versus the New York Jets, I don't see the offense doing much. I don't really see Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson going out there and having their way. And on Thursday Night Football, a home game for Cleveland, I think they go out there and take advantage of this poor Jet offense. So they're definitely a start this week. The next start is the Los Angeles Rams. So the Rams is a streaming option. Have a great matchup this week, once again, where this Ram defense, they've been playing a little bit better as well over the last few weeks with a great matchup with the Giants. I give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the last couple games here for the Rams, they've gone out there and put up some points. Week 15 versus Washington, 20 points allowed, a sack, an INT, a block kick. Week 16 versus New Orleans, 22 points allowed, 2 sacks, and an INT. So this week here with a good matchup, like I mentioned, is a streaming option. Giants, I give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I think the Rams could get pressure early and often in this offense. I know Saquon Barkley's still one of the better running backs in the league, but line one of the worst in the league. And the 5th and final defense, DST, I look to start this week here is the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles have a great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. I give up the 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I know this season, this Philly defense really hasn't been good besides their front line against the run. Besides that, in the passing game, teams have gone up and down the field all season versus Philly DST. But the last couple weeks now, to end the season with Arizona and the Giants once again on the schedule, those are great matchups for this Philly DST. We know they got good pass rushers, but it's just been a weird season, like I said, where the secondary's been torched for the most part. But this week with a great matchup versus Arizona, where besides Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, and Connor, it's been tough sledding for the most part this year. We've even Hollywood Brown banged up and not doing much as well. So I think Philly takes care of business at home once again this week. And the Cardinals, like I said, have turned the football over a lot this season. So that's a few defense DST units I look to start for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.